Dear panelists, dear attendees, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's become a tradition for FAO to be part of this unique Life in Kyrgyzstan conference. I'm delighted to greet you on behalf of FAO. I am the FAO representative here in the Kyrgyz Republic. And this session is on strengthening the evidence base for building resilience of rural households to climate-related risks in the Kyrgyz Republic through multi-sectoral actions. This year, you will know that the world has faced an unprecedented challenge of public health emergency. COVID-19 has demonstrated that seemingly far-removed spheres such as public health, agriculture, climate change, adaptation, and social protection are all bound together. And one broken linkage can cause the whole thing to fall apart, setting back our attempts to achieve sustainable development. To set progress towards achieving the SDGs back on track, we feel that data-driven policy responses are really important in this regard. Today, we're going to hear essentially three presentations. We're going to hear from Ms. Tanya Santibanez, the Agriculture Officer from the Regional FAO Office, Mr. Marlen Tiandiev, the National Project Coordinator, and Dr. Kanat Tilakiev, who will join us from the University of Central Asia on climate change, rural poverty, and food and nutrition security nexus in the Kyrgyz Republic. We will also have the presentation of Mr. Muratbek Koshov, the FAO Natural Resource Officer, and Ms. Larissa Minbeeva, who will share the results of the dataset clearance and ways of their matching for further analysis, construction, and matching. And last but not least, Ms. Ezel, the FAO Gender and Social Protection Consultant, will conclude how climate and disaster risk information can better inform social protection policies and programs, and how social protection can support response, adaptation, and mitigation actions. I think these sessions will be interesting and present lots of food for thought. So I encourage you to post questions, which we will attempt to handle at the end. The way I propose to handle this is to allow 20 minutes for each of the three individual presentations, and then allow 10 minutes Q&A after that. So with this introduction, let us commence. I will turn my video off while I am not speaking, and I pass the floor now to my colleagues Marlen, Kanat, and Tanya to take the first part of this session. Over to you, colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Adam. We will share the screen. So thank you again, Adnam and the Live in Kyrgyzstan conference team for giving us the opportunity to share with you some outputs and achievements in Kyrgyzstan. Greetings from Budapest. Next slide, please, Marlene. We divided the presentation in three parts. In the first part, I will introduce you why we are working in Kyrgyzstan in the framework of FAO Multidisciplinary Fund and how the project was adjusted to COVID-19 circumstances approaching now multiple risks. In the second part, my colleagues Kanat and Marlen will present the main outputs of the project responding to climate change and COVID-19 issues in some areas of Kyrgyzstan. The third part, in the question and answers, we will be happy to hear from you. Next slide. Okay, so I would like to start mentioning that Kyrgyzstan is one of the most beautiful countries in Central Asia. As you know, over 80% of the country covers by mountains and large alpine lakes dotting a landscape characterized by fascinating village. Agriculture is one of the key economic sectors in Kyrgyzstan with 48% of labor force. In Kyrgyzstan is highly vulnerable to the effect of climate change. And the poverty level is high and 70% of the poor live in rural areas. More than 40% of agricultural land seriously degraded, and there are more than 400,000 small-scale farms with an average of 3 hectares of land. This aspect of the country were the same reason why FAO funded activities in Kyrgyzstan last year. Next slide, please. In this regard, the project was designed to addressing several problems in Kyrgyzstan. First, lack of capacities at national and district levels in using information tools related to climate change. Lack of coordination of relevant ministries on matters related to climate action, food security, and poverty reduction effort. Fragmented and incomplete information on climate change and food security and rural poverty nexus. And in order to support countries to address this problem, the main goal of this project is to establish a national mechanism to better understand the existing linkage between climate change and poverty, rural poverty, strengthening the capacities and promoting evidence-based decision-making process to enhance food security and nutrition. To achieve it, the project has two outputs. One of them is related to capacity development for data gathering, interpretation, and use for enhanced climate action. The second output refers to facilitate dialogue between different ministries, including Ministry of Economy, Emergency, and Labor, to identify the potential complementarities and appropriate climate and poverty reduction measures, developing roadmap to enhance poverty reduction and climate action efforts in Kyrgyzstan. I would like to mention that the field activities of the project was focusing in Aktala, as you know, the most vulnerable district of Kyrgyzstan. With this approach, the project started in September last year in partnership with local NGO, the Agency for Development Initiative 80. Until March, I wanted to comment that all the activities were going as planned with good results. However, due to COVID-19, the project has to adjust its approach in order to address the immediate needs caused by COVID-19 to more vulnerable smallholders of Kyrgyzstan. Marlene, the next slide, please. It means the project reoriented the activities. All the international travels, workshops, dialogues, study tours were canceled, and budget was reallocated in order to cover the immediate issues, not just in Aktala, also in Susak, in Nokat, Batken, and the lake. The project is addressing not just climate change risk, but also food security risk by COVID-19, caused by COVID-19. It means the project in this moment is contributing to increase the resilience and reducing vulnerability of smallholders in Kyrgyzstan in partnership with, as I mentioned it, with Agency for Development Initiative ADI, and also with a partnership with WFP. I stop here because this was the introduction of how is the approach of our project. And now I will pass the floor to Kanat. Yeah.
So I am responsible for the explanation how was research survey was organized and what was the key target and what were analyzed finally. And main idea for the survey was to understand how the climate change, how the climate not change, how the climate fluctuations, how this weather can affect on agriculture, on the poverty issues, food consumption in a selected target area. We did study, we started study at the beginning of September last year. I was responsible for the training, development of the questionnaire, and also for data analysis. Study was done by the Agency for Development Initiatives, Kyrgyz-based NGO, and we was able to cover all 13 ILI maps of Aktala district. So in each ILI map, select one village, and it gives us possibility to create a representative sample of the 200 59 households, and it covers 1,395 people in the target area. We need to say that compare of the Akhtala population profile, it's slightly different. If we analyze Naryn province, average household size slightly bigger, but there are a little bit more proportion of male compared with the females. In other respects, it's very similar to the country demographic profile, and basically we have that men generally heads of the households, about 85% of the households covered with the average age of almost 49 years. Most of them married, and female much elder. Average age of them was close to 60 years, and most of them were widows. So it represents the current demographic profile is typical for the rural areas in the country. Main agricultural assets is the two types of resources available for almost for every household. It's agricultural land and livestock. Basically, there was more or less favorable situation with access to land. Almost 95% of rural households have different kind of lands. Most of the lands is irrigated land, and there are also very good access to the hay fields, and access to the pastures was also quite good. But the main agricultural activity is livestock, and most of the livestock it's sheep, cattle, and cattle. Other animals was less present, almost no poultry, for example. And there was also some proportion of goats, and horses also quite popular. But horses, it's a very typical to the rural areas. It's basically the parameter which can, how to say, differentiate poor and non-poor households, because poor households almost don't have horses at all. We analyze poverty results, and it demonstrates that it's higher, compare country and compare province level. For example, if on the country level in 2019, poverty level was 20%, 20.1%, and in Naryn province it was 28%, but for Akhtala area it was 33.6%. Poverty gap and poverty severity indexes also was much higher compared to the country and compared to the province level. For example, if extreme poverty rate was 4.6% for Akhtala districts, but for the extreme poverty rate for Naryn area, it was 2.5%. So it almost was significantly higher in all reported poverty indicators. What was very interesting when we found that when we're analyzing climate change parameters, that over the year we have selected several related to each other climatic change, climatic events, we can say it. It's a droughts, floods, low snow, and also freezing. So it was somehow like a vicious cycle of the climate negative impact. We have low snow during winter period, and later we have droughts, and also to some periods we have also accidents of the floods and freezing during winter period of time, which coincide with the low snow. And look on the diagrams, then you see from year to year number of the cases of climatic change for this selected four main weather events. It's increasing several times. When we compare 2014 to 2019, the number of the registered cases increased almost 4 times. It doesn't mean, okay, yes. Again, yes, look on the droughts, floods, freezing and low snow. And number of events in 2010 maximum was 80. Next year, it's already 100. Then you see 150, 200, and then almost 300. So it means that, and we cover 475 respondents. We from each household we ask head of the household and his wife and his spouse. Then we collect close to 500 responses, and responses, let's say, increased over the year. It doesn't mean that the number of events increased, but the intensity of the perception by the farmers of those events increased several times. It means that the droughts becoming the climate, let's say, event which seriously threaten households and directly affect on their livelihoods. When we ask what was the reason or based on the perception, and it was very close linkage, and it was much increasing hotter temperatures during the summer period and decreasing number of rains, and it was main two climatic change events which affect on the agriculture decline. Its effect on the worsening food security and nutrition, increasing poverty level, and it led also to the migration. We found that surprisingly high number of people migrate. We have migration level reported 4-5%, but we have close to 13% of the households have migrants in Akdala districts, and it's also affecting on the stagnating of local market because demands decline because people in the working age leaving the territory and moving in the search of the higher income to the other areas of Kyrgyzstan, urban centers of Kyrgyzstan, and outside of the country. When we ask people how they, let's say, go about their coping strategies and what was, let's say, main shocks. Main shock was, again, the same. It was droughts and irregular rain, so the climate change events was one of the main shocks which affects poor and non-poor strata of the Akdala districts. And we also found that it's maybe not related to the climate change, but it's very important for the agricultural population. It's a livestock disease. It was the third by importance shock which affect almost all rural households in the area. And when we are looking on the coping strategies, it's very interesting that it's almost similar for the poor and non-poor people, except of the, let's say, look on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years on the 5 option. Non-poor people twice more often selling their livestock. So for them, livestock it become one of the resources how they can overpass the hard situation. But for poor people, it's a much lower availability for that because of the lower number of the heads of the house of the animals they have. But also probably because they want to, let's say, save at least the resource which can be available for them in the very worst situation. What was the conclusions we came? It's very simple that we evidently see that the climate shocks increasing over time in Akdala area and negatively affect on the people. And it's basically based on the lack of the rains during summer and also low snow during winter periods. And its effect also on the food nutrition security in the area because almost all households purchase fruits and vegetables. They can consume only locally produced products like milk, meat, and also some households, about a quarter of households using own produced grain, wheat for the making breads. But again, yes, most of the products households purchased on the market, so they depend a lot from the purchasing products. And any shocks, like for example, which happened this year during the COVID-19, and also it was a higher macroeconomic instability in the world, food prices increased in the world, and in Kyrgyzstan too. Yes, we observe a very high increase of the prices for very basic food stuff, and its directly affect. We can make definitely such a conclusion that poverty this year due to COVID and other economic and political shocks in Kyrgyzstan will lead to the increase of the poverty in the area. And it's also based on the very low productivity. Productivity is several times lower than it potentially might be, and it's negatively affecting on the wealth of the local people. And compared to the other regions of the Kyrgyzstan, and even to other parts of the Narin province, poverty rate and inequality in Akhtala district is much higher. What we suggest to do is to continue to analyze how climate shock should be affect specifically vulnerable households, and adopt local development plans to the improving situation, to increase awareness raising, and also to teach people how to protect themselves from such kind of shocks. And maybe also introduction of the new crops and resistant plants, trees, animals to the climate change. It also potentially may improve nutrition patterns and also situation of the livelihoods of the local people in Akhtala. And also significant efforts should be concentrated on the increasing of the knowledge, improving and capacity building specifically among the poor farmers. That's basically all, and I can give the floor to Marlene, so he can continue.
Colleagues, I'm afraid we're pretty much out of time for this session. Marlene, did you have something to add? We only have a couple of minutes left. Dr. Kanat, while you actually have the floor, there was a question regarding where your climate variables come from, and whether this is a perception of individuals or the variables are taken for ground stations, and indeed how you differentiate the poor versus non-poor households.
We did a survey. It means that we ask people about their consumption, what they do for themselves for the last 12 months. Based on this information, we concentrate on aggregate consumptions, which is a basis for defining the poverty level. So we define poverty level so we can differentiate between from the sample poor and non-poor households. It was approximately, yes, as you can see, every third, not third, but 28.6% of households from the sample was poor. And it means that 33.6% of people in those households are living below the poverty line. Then we ask people again, but not all people in the households. Basically, as I remember, I think I told this information. We asked head of the household and his spouse about the climate change, which is what was most significant for the last 6 years. Since the information was collected from the all ILIMAC, so across the whole territory of the district, it means that it covers, we cover based on the responses of the people about their perception, how these events was affect on their households, on their agricultural production.
Okay, thanks. Did you also ask them about their yield losses?
Yes, yeah. Yield losses was also included. So it was the basic, let's say, droughts was the biggest problem in the area. And the lack of, and finally, lack of the feed for the animals was the biggest problems they faced every winter.
Okay, so as you can see, we do need to leave time for Q&A, and we are running a little bit behind. So, Marlene, do you have something that we can present quickly?
Yes, very briefly. Having
Okay,
in
go
mind
ahead,
that time is
over
limited,
to you.
just very briefly, yes. I just want to also share some other interim results we have achieved within the MDF initiative. So next slide, please. So climate change adaptation plan was one of the key results. And this plan was developed based on the results of survey in Akhtala, also experience of other projects, and sectoral development plans of Akhtala Rayon were also taken into consideration, including further consultations at Rayon level that helped a lot in finalization of this plan. This plan includes vulnerability analysis, including on the plant production, livestock, irrigation, and also includes key targeted adaptation measures on crop production, irrigation, forestry, livestock, and pasture. This plan also can serve as an instrument for resource mobilization of investment funds from other relevant stakeholders. And this plan was adopted by the Coordination Council, which was also supported by MDF initiative. The most important thing I just want to mention that administration of Akhtala state district, they confirmed and agreed that they co-finance implementation of this plan. So next. Within this initiative at policy level, we have also provided and conducted assessment and a roadmap assessment. It is very shortly analyze existing interlinkages between the strategic and legal policy framework and institutional coordination mechanism on climate change, disaster risk reduction, food security, and poverty reduction. As was a roadmap, it is aimed to provide guidance on the key steps to enhance poverty reduction, climate change, mainstreaming efforts in Kyrgyzstan. So all these two documents, results will be presented at the end final meeting of MDF initiative, which is supposed to be, we plan it to conduct it in December. Next slide, please. With this initiative, we also conducted a number of workshops, seminars, and all of these building capacity events aimed at strengthening the capacity of national and local level stakeholders. Also, it was a great opportunity to brainstorm and discuss climate data gathering and its linkages with social economic dimensions. In addition, we could also provide some technical equipment to Akhtala district, such as PC computer, printer, so they can use it further and also in relation to climate change issues. So next slide, please. Trainings, capacity buildings. So within this initiative, we also were able to conduct a number of trainings, GIS, climate change, and its linkages with poverty, social protection, migration, and market. And this was very important. So within these trainings, majority of participants highlighted that it was very important to have a local climate change adaptation plan. Some of the recommendations, ideas also were incorporated into the climate change adaptation plan. Next. COVID-19 impact project started this survey, how the COVID impacted on farming activities, on selected small-scale farmers, on their food security, and also we will be able to analyze coping strategies. So as a result, we hope that this study should form the basis for developing recommendations at the local level, including resilience plans that can be further incorporated with the local development programs. And at the same time, at the national level, we hope it will be also elaborate some recommendations to improve policy responses. Next. Assistance to vulnerable farmers. Within this initiative, we were able to mobilize some technical assistance to 1,140 families with support of our partner Agency for Development Initiatives and also WFP. we contributed in strengthening resilience to climate shocks through providing trainings, inputs. The seeds particularly were provided by our partner of 16 varieties of vegetable and berry crops to increase the resiliencies. Next, please. TOT trainings. FAO, through its partner of ADI, currently is in the process of conducting a number of certified trainings jointly with Kyrgyz Agrarian University, targeted to selected agronomists from the selected rayons, based on the training programs which were actually developed and adopted by FAO and jointly with WFP on various sustainable agricultural techniques, including climate-smart agriculture technologies in the context of climate change. Next slide.
If you could hurry along, please.
Yes, this is actually the last. Thanks to our ADI partner, we were also able to record some trainings, and our partners through its farmer school, Deyhan Mektebi, have been already uploaded 8 video tutorials on agriculture and some other 3 more under development. So let me stop it here, and thank you very much. If you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, excellent. The Q&A box is empty at this point, so we're a little bit behind. I suggest we go ahead. Dr. Kanad, thank you so much for joining us from the University of Central Asia. You know, it's really important for FAO's work to be underpinned by evidence. We want to be an evidence-based organization. We want to work with partners who are very good at this and able to provide support in this area. So thanks to all 3 of you very much. Fascinating. If we have time, we'll come back. But for now, I suggest we push ahead. I'd like to pass the floor to Ezel Mirzabekova. Ezel, perhaps you could introduce your segment yourself and take it from there. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Adnan. But we made little changes, actually. Can I call for Larissa Minbaeva, so because I will be providing the concluding remarks to these 2 presentations.
Yes, no problem. Go ahead.
Уважаемые коллеги, добрый день. Мы очень рады, что в такое сложное время мы имеем возможность встретиться здесь и представить результаты нашей работы и получить новую полезную для нас информацию. Год назад мы были слушателями на конференции, а сейчас мы имеем возможность представить нашу работу, и мы благодарны за такую возможность. Сейчас я презентую результаты нашей работы, которую мы проделали совместно с нашими коллегами из ФАО в рамках проекта «Укрепление доказательной базы для социальной защиты с учетом рисков в Кыргызской Республике». Эта работа была проделана в рамках проекта глобальными целями, которые было сокращение бедности в сельской местности и повышение устойчивости средств существования к угрозам и кризисам. Мы знаем, что очень много информации находится в открытом доступе из разных источников и в разных форматах. И нашей задачей было систематизировать эту информацию, найти, представить ее в таких форматах, в общих форматах, удобных для использования, для дальнейшего использования учеными. Значит, первая часть – это данные, представленные в отчетах МЧС за 2003-2017 год. Вторая часть – это вторая задача была систематизировать климатические перемены на основе инструмента OSMAP. Это данные о климате, температура, осадки и так далее. И третья часть – это систематизировать данные о бедности, занятости, труде, доходах, активах, где это возможна социальная защита, из наборов данных «Жизнь в Кыргызстане» за период с 2010 по 2016 годы. Потом нам необходимо было разработать данные в формате, который позволял бы объединить их по времени и местоположению. Значит, как я уже сказала, наши данные состояли из 3 глобальных частей, которые объединены по году и району. Формат данных – это широко используемый формат, это SPSS и Excel формат, на выбор пользователя. Значит, сначала я расскажу о первой части, это жизнь в Кыргызстане, ЛиК. Значит, почему необходимо было сделать эту работу? Эти данные открыты, и действительно они доступны для использования, однако данные представлены в различных файлах в формате SPSS, в формате Excel, и наша задача была объединить эти файлы, объединить их таким образом, чтобы можно было объединить их по ключу район-год в единых базах. В рамках нашей работы мы объединили более 100 файлов, объединили их в 17 файлов. Мы взяли данные в опроснике населенного пункта, данные о домохозяйствах, которые включают жилищные условия, активы, кредиты, сбережения, расходы на различные цели, доходы, миграция и шоки. Кроме того, мы рассмотрели индивидуальные опросники и взяли данные о индивидуальных оценках благополучия и рынке труда. И очень важная часть – это сельскохозяйственная часть. Это данные о земельных участках, об управлении сельхозкультурами, о продаже и животноводстве. Почему необходимо было это сделать и объединить это еще, кроме того? Потому что вопросники, они отличаются год от года. То есть в целом как бы есть... В целом набор переменных повторяется год от года, но есть некоторые различия. И нет как бы индивидуальных идентификаторов для переменных, которые бы позволили объединить эти данные, сразу работать с ними. Поэтому по результатам исследования мы сделали следующую работу. Мы объединили вот в такой файл. Сейчас я вам покажу эту структуру. Значит, как я уже сказала, мы объединили все данные в 17 файлов, и структуру мы предоставили в виде описания. Значит, исследователь может, прежде чем приступить к работе, может посмотреть, какие переменные, какие данные включены в общий файл. Может посмотреть, в каких годах данные присутствуют, в каких годах данные отсутствуют, и какие переменные из оригинальных файлов были взяты, включены в общую структуру. Кроме того, мы включили описание переменных, то есть метки и значения переменных, и комментарии, то есть все данные, все действия, которые мы проделали в процессе работы над файлами, все перекодировки, Таким образом, у нас получилась структура и, собственно, данные. Данные представлены в Excel формате и данные представлены в SPSS формате. Следующая часть наших данных, нашей общей базы, это данные Министерства чрезвычайных ситуаций. Эти данные были представлены в различных форматах, то есть они не были систематизированы, они не были собраны. И мы совместно с коллегами из ФАО и МЧС разработали общую структуру данных, проанализировали то, что у нас есть, и получили данные в следующей структуре. Дата чрезвычайной ситуации, код района, область, вид ЧС, тип ЧС, степень тяжести и краткая информация о ЧС. Всего мы объединили данные за период с 2000 по 2019 годы. В целом у нас получилось 4440 чрезвычайных ситуаций. И сейчас я хочу вам предоставить краткую статистику о том, что мы получили. В первую очередь распределение ЧС по территориям. В целом наименее подвержены ЧС 18 территорий, где за этот период с 2000 по 2019 год было не более 50 ЧС. Здесь на карте представлено розовым цветом. Это 18 территорий, 18 районов и городов областного значения. 20 территорий – это розовый цвет, это те территории, которых за этот период случилось от 50 до 100 ЧС. Далее 9 территорий, это сиреневого цвета, где произошло от 100 до 150 ЧС. И наиболее подвержены 4 территории от 151 до 200 ЧС. И самые-самые подверженные ЧС территории – это 3 района – Каракульжинский, Токтагульский, Алайский районы. То есть за период с 2000 до 2019 года там произошло более 200 ЧС. Если рассмотреть все ЧС по видам, то мы видим, что самая наиболее часто встречающаяся ЧС – это сель. Это 26% от всего количества ЧС. То есть в наибольшей степени Кыргызстан, конечно, подвержен ЧС природного характера. Если рассмотреть ЧС по типам, то действительно 79% ЧС – это ЧС природного характера. На втором месте это ЧС техногенного характера 14%. 6% это ЧС социального характера, и ЧС конфликтного характера составляет менее 1%. Кроме того, ЧС были распределены по степени тяжести. Степень тяжести, то есть вся кодировка у нас как бы соответствует кодировке, используемой Министерством чрезвычайных ситуаций. И здесь мы видим, что наибольшую долю составляют ЧС местного характера, то есть те, которые происходят на территории населенного пункта. Это 64%. И второй по степени распространенности 17% это ЧС районные, городские. И достаточно высокий процент, 13% это ЧС республиканского характера. Теперь на данной диаграмме мы представили распределение ЧС по годам и типам ЧС. И мы видим, что наиболее таким кризисными, да, наиболее годами, где было наибольшее количество ЧС, это был 2010 год и 2012 год. Ну, в принципе, используя полученную нами базу данных, можно рассматривать различные группировки и производить анализ чрезвычайных ситуаций и использовать эту информацию при анализе и при сопоставлении с другими факторами, параметрами других исследований. Еще одним источником, одним ресурсом данных, которые мы использовали при формировании нашей базы, это были данные ОСМЭП. ОСМЭП – это кладезь данных, где есть множество информации, которая различного характера. В рамках нашей задачи мы выбирали данные, которые касаются именно климатических условий. Здесь наша работа...
If you could begin to wrap up, please, Larissa.
Вот. Да, все, я уже заканчиваю. Это последняя часть. Значит, это была последняя часть. Вот здесь представлены те показатели, которые мы отобрали в нашу структуру. Также эти показатели мы отобрали по районам и по годам. И последняя часть, наша задача была скорее техническая, но здесь мы сделали некоторую работу по сопоставлению данных. Мы попробовали посмотреть, взять данные LiK и посмотреть, различаются ли какие-то показатели в зависимости от того, подвержена ли территория ЧС или не подвержена. И здесь мы сделали распределение таким образом. Мы взяли ЧС степени тяжести от районной, городской и выше, то есть 3, потому что мы рассматриваем данные на районном уровне, и взяли сельскую местность и сгруппировали по типу, значит, сделали такую группировку. Единицы это были ЧС в определенном году, 0 это не было. У нас получилась вот такая группировка. И мы сравнивали разные показатели, и мы посмотрели, в данном случае посмотрели некоторые показатели удовлетворенности некоторыми индивидуальной оценки благополучия. И здесь мы выявили, что каких-то существенных отличий в районах, где произошли ЧС и не произошли, мы не выявили. То есть вот красным помечены статистически значимые различия, то есть с точки зрения статистики различия есть, но с точки зрения как бы смысла, да, логического, то есть в принципе, существенных различий здесь мы не видим. Ну, возможно, мы предполагаем, что подверженность ЧС является не единственным фактором, который воздействует на те или иные факторы жизни домохозяйства. И, конечно, здесь надо рассматривать факторы в совокупности. Вот здесь на этих таблицах мы видим распределение по годам: удовлетворенность работой, удовлетворенность здоровьем, и по всем этим показателям существенных различий мы не выявили. Все, спасибо за внимание.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Larissa, and thank you for wrapping that up. I think these have been very, very interesting presentations. I think it's really important to have this data, as it very much informs our disaster response plans. It helps local government, national government, and then the point you made also is that it helps FAO link its response in the way it affects the most vulnerable to try and protect them from some of the shocks of these adverse events. So I did ask Aisel to take the floor earlier, and she quite rightly turned me down. But now that we seem to be back on track, Aisel Mirzabekova, I turn the floor over to you, the FAO Gender and Social Protection Consultant, to introduce your segment and take it on. Over to you, Aisel.
Thank you, Mr. Qureshi. Apologies for making that kind of comment. So we just wanted to make this more flawlessly and smoothly, this transition. In my presentation, I will be focusing on the role of social protection in climate change adaptation, emergency response, and disaster risk management. So I will add up to the previous presentations, which are providing clear evidence that there is a need of stronger integration between climate risk management, disaster risk reduction, poverty reduction, and risk-informed social protection strategies and policies to address the needs of the most vulnerable people. So in order to set the floor, so and to be on the same page on the key terms, I would like to start with the definitions. So first of all, let me speak about what is social protection is. Social protection is concerned with protecting and helping those who are poor, vulnerable, marginalized, and dealing with risk. So these are different types of policies and programs that are addressing economic, environmental, social vulnerabilities to food insecurity, poverty through protective, preventive, promotive, and transformative efforts to its beneficiaries. There are numerous policies and programs which include within the different conceptual frameworks on social protection, and these programs can be categorized into three main types. So social assistance, maybe this is one of the most familiar for you. This is non-contributory programs for most vulnerable groups which do not have other means to adequately support their families and households. In Kyrgyzstan, for example, we have non-contributory transfer in cash, which are supporting vulnerable families with children, vouchers or school feeding and other subsidies. Social insurance, this is also would be familiar for you. It's a contributory programs that help us to minimize the risk associated with life cycle stages. And it could be compensations which are provided to the most vulnerable due to the illnesses, injury, disabilities, death, maternity and paternity leaves due to unemployment or old age. For example, unemployment assistance, pension system, also social health insurance. Labor market intervention. These are policies and programs which are designed to facilitate employment and promote the efficient operation of labor markets. And there are passive and active policies and intervention in these terms. When we talk about active one, this is the interventions which aim to help the unemployed and the most vulnerable find jobs, matching job seekers with the current vacancies, or integrating and adapting job seekers with new skills, providing them employment through creation of new jobs. As for the passive, this is ensuring with minimum employment standards and benefits. So this is a slide with some examples for more information. When we speak more about this social protection, traditionally social protection has been focused on reduction of social and economic related risks. However, within the last decade, the flexible and adaptive nature of social protection has been recognized worldwide, and there were efforts devoted to assessing how to take advantage of these systems and promote programs in order to respond to climate risks and thus foster stronger linkages with climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction management strategies. One of the there are diverse approaches, but I want to concentrate on two social protection approaches. One is shock responsive, and another one is risk-informed social protection. So when we speak about shock responsive social protection, it focuses on potential for using social protection systems to deliver response to shocks, crises for in low-income countries, in fragile contexts. So this kind of approach helps us to reduce the need for separate emergency responses. This kind of approach has the potential to integrate developmental and humanitarian work, making it more flexible, timeliness, adaptable, and adequate of the lack of resources, and making these linkages with early warning systems and actually coordinating different ministers, agencies at national and local levels. And when we also speak about this type of responses as partnership based, when public, private, and non-state actors are also involved, like my colleagues were informing that different stakeholders were also involved in this process. Risk-informed social protection, this is a set of policies and programs which are designed with multiple social, economic, and climate-related risks and considerations. So this is when there are adequate. So let me share this slide to tell more about this risk-informed actions, right? So we can concentrate on these three pathways. First one is when risk-informed actions include interventions that provide adequate design and response to multiple and compounding vulnerability. So in other words, reducing vulnerability and reliance on negative coping strategies in the events of shocks, preventing people from potential losses which are caused by shocks, and helping them to smooth consumption and production during this as a result of impacts of shocks. Second pathway is integrated planning, which is bridging the humanitarian and development nexuses, providing the help in reducing climate vulnerability by addressing economic barriers in order to adopt more productive and climate resilient investments and strategies, and complementing or other production-focused programs, like for example, we do related or based on the knowledge we and evidence we receive from the field from our researchers, making this kind of planning and bridging. And the last one is supporting inclusive disaster preparedness and response. When we are acknowledging that there are different systems which exist in this government state structure, but we acknowledge that when it's well functioning, when it's flexible, and when it's able to scale up social protection systems, it can be very important part for the country's disaster management strategy. And being able to reach the poor population, especially those who are living in rural areas, who are affected by climate risks in a fast and cost-efficient manner. One of the examples of this kind of intervention is early warning, early action um, uh, strategy, which is anticipating the actions and responding. And in conclusion, this taking into account that in this complex context of the Kyrgyz Republic, like my colleagues presented, there are many challenges to actually have this integrated approach, but risk-informed social protection measures and actions, so they actually are targeting and enhancing the capacity of the rural household to cope with and respond to and withstand this economic, natural, and man-made shocks, and how it can be done with the immediate access to social protection measures in time of crisis and shocks. And this can help them in a short-term and long-term being resilient in these terms. First, in the short term, we can protect poor households from impacts of the shock, including the loss of productive assets and helping them to minimize the risks not letting them to resort to negative coping practices. In the longer term, social protection will help to smooth consumption, boost production, and allow the investments that contribute to building the resilience of people to future threats and crises. Integration of comprehensive, as I mentioned, early warning, early action, or in also called forecast-based financing and risk-informed management approach in social protection systems, it can help to translate that warnings and that take into consideration and anticipate the reactions. And identifying the best timing and best modalities for interventions in time of disaster with this integrated approach involving different sectors and different actors. Finally, risk-informed social protection measures and actions can help to strengthen the capacities and preparedness of the social protection system to mitigate the impacts of shocks while balancing and these competing priorities of different stakeholders and actors, and also competing scarce resources in developing countries. Thank you. Over to you.
Excellent. Good. Thank you very much, Aysel. Thank you for your very, very clear presentation indeed. Indeed, it was so clear that I don't see any questions directly targeted at you. So I think that is a reflection of just how well you laid out your presentation. I do have a couple of unanswered questions, however, and they relate to the previous session. So if there are no questions related to Aysel's presentation, maybe I can put those to the previous presenters. Larissa, I think there was one for you regarding whether you had been able to integrate the collected data from the Ministry of Emergencies and with Google Earth into the Life in Kyrgyzstan files. I don't know whether you can you handle that question now? Please go ahead.
Да-да.
Over to you then. The question was whether you had been able to integrate the collected data from the Ministry of Emergencies and Google Earth into the Life in Kyrgyzstan file.
Мы это сделали. Как я уже говорила, у нас есть определенные ключи, по которым мы можем эти данные сливать. Это код района. Мы взяли в качестве кода классификацию по СААТе. Это государственный классификатор территориально-административных единиц и год. Данные представлены в едином формате, то есть это Excel или SPSS, и можно их брать и сливать каким угодно образом.
So colleagues, that brings us to the end of this segment. I think it's been a very, very useful segment indeed. Indeed, digitalization is very much the future of agriculture. As they say, if you can't measure it, you can't improve upon it. And I think that the collection of data and the evidence base for agriculture is very much something we need to embrace and work more with. So my warm thanks to my colleagues, to all the presenters for the excellent presentations. They were clear, they were concise, and very well timed. I would like to thank the organizers of Life in Kyrgyzstan and the Secretariat here. I'd like to thank all the attendees for listening so carefully. I think this really has been a very worthwhile segment to have. And with that, noting that we're a little bit ahead of schedule, I would bring this segment to a close. So again, the presentation slides will be posted at the conference website shortly after the conference. So rest assured that you will get copies of everything that you've seen today. And I'm sure that you can take any burning issues up on a bilateral basis with the presenters. So again, my tremendous thanks to you. And with that, I bring to an end this segment. Thank you all.